12:34 on TSN 690. It is Game Points. I'm your host, Matthew Ross. We're here till 1 a.m. Mo Khan in studio as well. Stefano Micella helping us out. Jimmy G on the board. Going to chat with our next guest. You can catch him on Fantasy Sports Network weekdays at 3 p.m. You can also check out SportsRageTV.com or MMA Meltdown on the Fight Network. Follow him on Twitter.com/SportsRage. It is Gabriel Morency. How you doing?
Hey, we're doing good tonight, Matt. How you doing?
Very good. Now, I missed your performance on OTR. How was it this week?
I was on last Thursday. I was telling you about last week, and
that's right.
I actually got a quick invite back, so I was on yesterday again, and always a lot of controversy. You know, I always end up stirring the pot and being the minority on the program. It seems like everybody always disagrees with me, but somebody's got to spread the truth, so I'll do it.
All right. Now, Stefano here in studio was mentioning you had some thoughts on CBC and Hockey Night in Canada tonight, so thought I would ask you about that first.
Well, you know, to be honest, I didn't have the game on with the sound. I was on Sirius XM tonight, but I had the game on in the studio. But I noticed earlier this evening, about half an hour before the game, CBC tweeted out a picture saying, 30 minutes till the puck drops, and it was a picture of a Boston Bruin just crushing a Canadian, like into the glass. And it just struck me as amusing immediately, in which, Elliot Friedman took offense the other day, I guess, to the angry tweets he was getting. And he claimed the CBC is unbiased, that they're not supposed to be cheering for the Canadian team. And I guess this is a new memo after 185 years of CBC broadcasts of cheering for the Canadian team until it's the Montreal Canadiens. And it's funny because when I was on in Montreal, people thought I was too anti-Montreal Canadian, and here I am right now, but I just call it like I see it. And, you got the picture. You've got, Ron McLean bitching about the French referees last week. On Saturday's game, and then game 2 of the series, the intermission was entirely focused on what the Boston Bruins were doing wrong. What's wrong with the Bruins? And, trust me, I've been around long enough to know that a lot of work goes into this stuff. They've got thousands of pictures to choose from. They choose the one with the Bruins hammering the Canadians. Not a shot of PK Subban, not a shot of Carey Price, but a shot of the Bruins hitting the Montreal Canadiens. That's what they go with. Then I thought it was classic tonight on Coach's Corner, and I'm not a Don Cherry hater. I think Don Cherry is great when it comes to hockey. I think that his hockey insight is real good. He's old school, but he really knows the game inside out. But I don't agree with a lot of his political rants and everything else. But I thought it was really funny tonight. And so, they asked him, so how do you think the Canadians played? And he's like, look, the Canadians played great in the first period. Let me show you what the Leafs did last year. They managed to work the Toronto Maple Leafs into the highlight package of Coach's Corner tonight, which was just freaking brilliant. And it goes on and on, man. Jim Hewson and Simpson, these guys, they have the elation when Boston scores. They have the ho-humness when the Canadians score. It's not in our heads. It really is a fact. For one reason or another, the CBC are not on board with the Montreal Canadiens party right now, and it's too bad. The Canadians actually have the best record in the playoffs so far, and PK Subban's playing the best hockey out of anybody in the National Hockey League right now, yet the CBC just seem to be crying that their beloved Bruins aren't getting it done.
Gabe, talk to us about the Raptors and the raw emotion on Sunday and how many fans showed up to Jurassic Park, and, of course, the big news of Dwayne Casey signing an extension with the Raptors on Tuesday.
It was a real heartbreaking loss, Mo. I got to tell you, it was a real emotional season. It was an emotional series, and normally I'd be frustrated that the Raptors let it get away from them, so to speak. They had an opportunity being up 3-2, but we see just how difficult it is to close out a series in the NBA when you just don't have that experience. Only the Washington Wizards have been able to do it, which they went into Chicago and took care of business in an elimination game on the road. But if you look at the Washington Wizards, the Wizards are loaded with guys that have played in big games before. Bradley Beal's played in huge games at Florida. John Wall's played in big games at Kentucky. Trevor Ariza played he was on the championship team with the Lakers. So, they've got big game experience. Nene's played in the playoffs with the Nuggets, et cetera. If you look at the Raptors, really, let's be honest. In December, before they traded Rudy Gay, the Toronto Raptors were just another useless franchise in the sports landscape. The least popular team in the NBA, a team that nobody wanted to play for, a team that, really people that went to the games, there were like 15,000 diehards and a couple of thousand people with free tickets. Even in Toronto, they've always had a loyal fan base, but it's never been mainstream. They've always been a solid number 3 in the landscape, way behind the Leafs and the Blue Jays. And they put themselves on a map, not only in Toronto, but across the National Basketball Association. They went from being the Sacramento Kings and being a meaningless franchise to winning 48 games and nearly beating the Brooklyn Nets. And there's no excuses. The Raptors were going to find a way to mess this up somehow. They got a little bit too elated, and they got caught up in the moment, and they couldn't close a deal against a veteran team. But I say it every week with you guys: the NBA is a disgrace. It's a rigged, crooked league. It's disgraceful. Why the hell is Joey Crawford doing a game? The fact is, Darren Williams fouls out of the game late. Kevin Garnett puts his hand up. You look in the face of the referee, not Crawford, but the other dude. You could tell that he knew what was going on. It was downright criminal what they did to the Raptors. They didn't want the Raptors on ABC TV playing against the Miami Heat, and they didn't want to have Toronto. They don't get any rating points in the United States for this. They didn't want the Raptors on TV for the next 2 weeks. It was a cute little story. Oh, look at the people in Canada. They really did. The NBA didn't want the Raptors advancing, and they got what they wanted in the end. And it's too bad. Casey deserves the contract extension. He learned like everybody else, Mo. I didn't like his rotations for the most part. But when it comes down to it, if you actually look at the Raptors roster, it's a bunch of journeymen and a couple of up-and-coming guys here. And, he got a hell of a lot out of this team. And I got a lot of faith in Majiri. I got a lot of faith in what he's going to do with the draft. I think he'll be bold. I think there will be changes with this team, as good as they were. But the future is bright for the Toronto Raptors, man. The Miami Heat's run is going to come to an end soon. Contracts are up next year. They're going to get broken up. I think the Raptors are going to be part of this new wave of Eastern Conference powers, along with the Washington Wizards, who are going to be good for years to come.
Chatting with Gabriel Morency. Sticking with the NBA, the firing of Mark Jackson, a lot of people calling it a travesty. Obviously, a lot of he rubbed some people the wrong way within the organization, but the bottom line is the guy was a winner. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, this is a story that's a pile of crap as well, that the mainstream media isn't really talking about or really giving you the truth, in which, and it's not a secret, I'm not breaking anything here, but seems like I'm the only one who's willing to talk about it and what's going on there. I've been talking about the Golden State Warriors issues for the last month. About a month ago, they sent one of their assistant coaches to the D-League, which was extremely rare. I might even brought it up here, which was extremely rare. And then about 2 weeks before the end of the season, Mark Jackson fires one of the assistant coaches. Basically, that's a GM's move. But basically, Jackson kicked the guy out of the room. He said, "You're gone, you're done." And then people thought around the league, oh, Mark Jackson's, on a power mad, egomaniacal rampage here. What's up with Jackson? But what was actually happening was the assistant coach, Ehrman, was actually secretly recording all of his conversations with Mark Jackson. So he would hit record on his cell phone when he would come into Jackson's office. And he would record all the coaches' conversations over lunch. Now, that's illegal to do in the state of California. So I don't know what it is with NBA owners and tapes, but no one's talking about this guy doing this. So the assistant coach was spying on Mark Jackson, essentially. Then he raised it up a notch. He pulled a George Costanza. Instead of leaving the tape recorder in the briefcase, he sort of just started leaving his phone around and recording everything that Jackson was saying to other assistant coaches. And it turns out that this assistant coach, allegedly, and I'll say that for legal reasons, but allegedly, was reporting back to the owner. So essentially the owner of the Golden State Warriors was spying on Mark Jackson and had a little snitch assistant coach who got fired by the Golden State Warriors when this was exposed, and then subsequently got hired immediately by the Boston Celtics. So it's funny how this little clique of NBA criminals works, in which, the mainstream media is not going to talk about it. They're all going to kiss the NBA's ass, but I don't care. What are the NBA going to do to me here? But It's a joke, and Jalen Rose briefly mentioned this. The people in San Francisco know what's going on here, but it's potentially a criminal situation with this guy. You're not allowed to record people without their knowledge in the state of California. Now, Donald Sterling was a moron and actually told the girl that, record this for some reason. I don't know why he would do that, but he did. This is a different situation. Mark Jackson never agreed to be recorded. And as I stated, there's only 12 states in the United States, that California happens to be one of them. But this guy gets a job with the Boston Celtics. And then Mark Jackson wanted out. So this, everyone's going to talk about, he's a good coach. And it's crazy that he got fired, blah, blah, blah. But, the reason, this is what's going on here. He didn't want to go back. So that's why the players played hard for him against the Clippers. They didn't mail it in, even though everyone knew Jackson was done there. And they didn't mail it in because they knew that their owner was screwing over Mark Jackson and the staff. So there's a lot of twisted stuff that goes on in the NBA that, people generally won't talk about.
Do you see him maybe being considered by the Knicks?
I think it's a perfect spot, Matt, obviously. And it's funny because Mark Jackson was pleading for the Knicks job a couple of years ago when he was a television analyst. And even I thought to myself, where does this guy get off? Why are they just going to give him the job? He has no coaching experience. And just because he's a good television analyst and he was a point guard doesn't mean he's going to be a good coach in the NBA. But this guy's proven, say what you will about Mark Jackson, but the guy has proven that he's a damn good coach. I think it'd be a good fit. It makes more sense than Steve Kerr, who's never coached before, but it'll be interesting. But, I guarantee you, Mark Jackson is not going to be unemployed long. He's going to have a job, as quick as he wants. But we'll say, by the end of the NBA Finals, Mark Jackson will be in place, if not faster.
He is Gabriel Morency. FantasySportsNetwork.com is the website. Check him out 3 o'clock weekdays. You can also see his website, SportsRageTV.com or Sports Rage on Twitter. Thanks, as always. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, big show tomorrow. We're talking hockey with the Hall of Famer Al Strachan,
nice,
who always tells it like it is. And give a shout-out to Jimmy on the other side of the glass. I remember Jimmy working the board in the old days, so it's good to hear that Jimmy's still rocking.
He's here. He's wearing an RVD wrestling T-shirt.
Well, I'll forgive him for that, but I'll forgive him for that one. Except, there's nothing wrong with the little Rob Van Dam, actually. So nothing wrong with that either. But always a pleasure, guys.
Thanks a lot.
That it is.